My stepmother spent $11,000 of my combat pay on my stepsister's wedding while I was on a forward operating base in a war zone. She used a power of attorney I signed for emergencies only. When I called home to check on my account, my own father laughed and said, "It's just money, Emily, don't be dramatic." That's when I knew exactly who my father had become, and I promised myself, right there on a cot in the middle of nowhere, that when I came home, I was going to make sure they never touched another dollar of mine again. If you love justice, karma, and watching greedy people lose everything they thought they'd gotten away with, subscribe right now, because this story is one of the wildest ones I've ever lived through. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old. I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Army, and before all of this happened, I actually believed my family loved me. Know how naive that sounds now? But let me back up, because you need to understand who I was before this story turns into what it turns into. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 14. It was just me and my dad, Richard, for almost 3 years after that. Those were hard years, but they were honest ones. My dad worked as an electrician. I did my homework at the kitchen table while he cooked dinner. And on Sundays, we'd watch football and eat terrible microwave popcorn. I loved him. He was flawed, but he was mine, and I trusted him completely. When I was 17, my dad started dating a woman named Denise. She was loud, she was charming in that fake sweet way some people are, and she had a daughter named Brittany who was 2 years younger than me. I wanted my dad to be happy. I really did. So when he married Denise a year later, I put on a bridesmaid dress and smiled through the whole ceremony, even though something in my gut told me this woman was not who she pretended to be. Denise never hit me. She never screamed at me. Her cruelty was quieter than that. And honestly, that made it worse. She had this way of comparing me to Brittany constantly. Brittany got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a "we'll see, money's tight right now." Brittany's report card went on the fridge. Mine went in a drawer. Small things. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, if you want the honest description. Looking back, I can see the pattern forming even in those early years, little moments I brushed off. At the time, because I didn't want to be the difficult stepdaughter everyone whispered about. Denise would plan family trips and somehow my name would get left off the hotel reservation by accident. She'd buy Brittany new clothes for the school year and tell me my old ones still had some life left in them. When I got accepted into an honors program my junior year, Denise told my dad it probably wasn't worth pursuing since not everyone is cut out for that college track. And I remember overhearing it through a cracked door, feeling something in my chest go tight and quiet. My dad never fully saw it, or maybe he saw it and told himself it was easier not to make waves. Either way, I learned early that in that house, my needs came after Denise's comfort and Brittany's happiness. Every single time. I joined the Army at 19, right after a rough semester at community college where I realized I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no money to figure it out slowly. The Army gave me structure, purpose, and for the first time since my mom died, people who actually seemed proud of me. My first duty station was Fort Benning, Georgia, and I threw myself into the work completely. Made sergeant faster than most people in my cohort, I was good at this. I was respected. Here's the part that matters for this story. In my 3rd year of service, my platoon sergeant sat all of us down and told us something every single soldier should hear early. He said, "Whatever you do, do not give anyone unrestricted access to your finances, no matter how much you trust them." I remember laughing a little, thinking that advice didn't apply to me. My dad was the most trustworthy person I knew. But 2 years later, right before my first deployment to a base overseas, my dad called me in a panic. He said Denise had been having some health scares. Nothing serious, but the doctors wanted to run a bunch of tests, and money was tight with the deductibles. He asked if I could set up something so that, just in case, someone back home could handle emergency expenses for me while I was gone. Since deployments can last many months and things happen. I want to be honest with you. Something in me hesitated. But he was my father. He'd raised me alone for 3 years after my mom died. So I signed a limited power of attorney, giving my dad, not Denise, my dad, the ability to access one specific savings account, strictly for emergencies, capped at what I thought was a reasonable amount for genuine unexpected costs. I remember saying out loud on the phone, "This is for emergencies only, Dad. Please." He said, "Of course, sweetheart. You have my word." I deployed 3 weeks later. For the first 4 months, everything seemed fine. I called home when I could, usually late at night on a spotty satellite connection, and my dad always sounded normal, if a little distracted. Denise rarely got on the phone, which honestly didn't bother me. Brittany, my stepsister, was 24 at the time and had just gotten engaged to a guy named Kyle, who worked in sales and talked a lot about closing deals at every family gathering I'd ever sat through. Then, in month 5, I logged into my banking app during a rare stretch of decent internet on base, mostly out of habit, not because I expected anything unusual. My savings account, the one meant for a house down payment someday, the one I'd built up dollar by dollar through combat pay, hazard pay, and every bonus I'd ever earned, was almost empty. I sat there staring at my phone for a full minute, genuinely thinking I was reading the numbers wrong. I refreshed the app 3 times. The number didn't change. Where there should have been just over $11,000, there was $642. I called my dad immediately. It was the middle of the night back home, but I didn't care. He picked up groggy, and when I asked him what happened to my account, there was this long pause. Then he said, and I will never forget these exact words, "Oh, yeah. Denise mentioned Brittany's venue needed a deposit and things kind of snowballed from there with the wedding. It's fine, Em, we'll figure it out." I remember sitting on that cot, night vision goggles still hanging around my neck from a shift I'd just come off of, and feeling something inside me crack. Not break completely. Not yet. Just crack. The way glass does right before it shatters. Said, "Dad, that was for emergencies. A wedding deposit is not an emergency." He got defensive fast. He said Denise had handled it, that I was overseas and didn't need to be stressed about family stuff, and that I was being selfish for making a big deal out of helping out family. Selfish. That word hit me harder than anything else he said. I had been sending money home for years whenever anyone asked. I had skipped my own leave time more than once to cover shifts, so junior soldiers with families could go home for the holidays. And now, because I was upset that $11,000 of my combat pay had vanished into my stepsister's wedding budget without my permission, I was the selfish one. That's when he said the line that opened this story. "It's just money, Emily. Don't be dramatic." I didn't sleep that night. I lay there running numbers in my head, trying to understand how someone drains over $10,000 from an account that was supposed to be capped for emergencies. Tati. Answer I'd learn much later was that Denise hadn't just used the power of attorney for one big withdrawal. She'd been slowly moving money for months, small enough amounts each time that I might not notice on a quick glance. Then finally making one large transfer for the venue deposit when the wedding planning hit a wall. I want to pause here and tell you something important. This wasn't just about money, even though the money mattered a lot. This was about trust. Had handed my father something incredibly fragile while I was thousands of miles away, doing a dangerous job, unable to protect myself from what was happening at home. And he let someone take it from me and then told me not to be dramatic about, if for the rest of that deployment something shifted in me, I still did my job. I still led my soldiers, still showed up every single day and did the work I was trained to do. But something behind my eyes had gone cold toward my father and stepmother. I stopped calling as often. When I did call, the conversations were short, polite, hollow. The wedding happened while I was still overseas. I wasn't there, obviously, and honestly, I didn't want to be. I saw the pictures later on social media. Brittany in a designer dress that, I found out afterward, cost more than my entire enlistment bonus. A venue with string lights and a live band. An open bar that ran until midnight. All of it partially funded by money that was supposed to be my safety net, my future, my down payment on a life I was risking everything to build. In the caption under one of the photos, Denise had written, "So grateful for family who show up for each other, no matter the distance." I read that caption more times than I'd like to admit. When I finally rotated home 8 months later, I expected an apology. I know now how foolish that was, but some small part of me still believed my father would see what he'd done once he had time to actually reflect on it away from Denise's influence. Instead, when I got back to Ohio for a 2-week leave before my next assignment, I walked into my dad's house and found half of my old bedroom, the one I still used during visits, converted into what Denise proudly called Brittany and Kyle's home office, since the newlyweds were staying there temporarily while they saved for a place of their own. My old furniture was in the garage under a tarp. My photos from high school, my mom's old jewelry box that I kept in that room, all of it shoved into cardboard boxes and stacked against the wall like garbage waiting for pickup. I stood in that garage holding my mother's jewelry box, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the day she died, a grief so sharp it was almost physical. Except this time, the grief was mixed with rage, because this wasn't loss from illness or fate. This was a choice my father had made. He chose Denise's comfort over my belongings. He chose Brittany's wedding over my future, and somewhere along the way, he chose to stop protecting me the moment protecting me became inconvenient. That night, I sat in my truck in the driveway, engine off, just staring at the house I grew up in, and I finally let myself cry. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying I'd trained myself to do in the army when things got hard. Real, ugly, gasping sobs, the kind that come from years of swallowing your feelings because someone always needed you to be strong for them instead. I called my best friend from basic training, a woman named Priya who was stationed at a different post but who I still talked to almost daily. I told her everything. The power of attorney, the missing money, the wedding, the garage full of my things. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something that changed everything. She said, "Emily, you're a sergeant. You know how to build a case. So build one." That was the turning point. I stopped crying in that driveway, and something in me went very still and very focused, the same way it does right before a mission when all the noise in your head disappears, and you can only see the objective in front of you. I drove to a motel that night instead of sleeping in my dad's house. Wasn't going to sleep under that roof again until I understood exactly what had happened to my money and exactly what my rights were. The next morning, I called my installation's Judge Advocate General office, the JAG office, which every service member has access to for legal assistance, and explained the situation to a legal assistance attorney. She confirmed something I suspected, but hadn't wanted to fully accept. A limited power of attorney restricted to emergency use when used for non-emergency personal expenses like a wedding. Deposit could absolutely constitute a misuse of that authority, and depending on the state and the specific language of the document, could potentially open the door to both civil recovery and, in more serious cases, fraud charges. I pulled the actual document I had signed. I had, thankfully, kept a digital copy in my own personal email, a habit drilled into me by that same platoon, sergeant who'd warned me about finances all those years ago. The document was crystal clear. It specified emergency medical or safety-related expenses only, with a hard cap of $2,000 per instance. Denise had orchestrated withdrawals totaling over $11,000, spread across 7 separate transactions over 5 months. I got my bank statements. I got the power of attorney document. I got screenshots of the wedding social media posts with dates that lined up almost perfectly with the fund transfers. I built a timeline, the same way I'd build an operations timeline for a mission, laying out every single piece of evidence. In order, clean, factual, undeniable. I also did something I'm not particularly proud of, but I don't regret it either. I called Brittany directly, not to accuse her, but to simply ask, in a calm, almost friendly tone, how the venue deposit had been paid. She, not knowing anything was wrong yet, happily told me that Mom handled it all, she's amazing like that, and even mentioned the exact vendor and the exact amount, $8,000 for the venue alone, which matched perfectly with one of the larger withdrawals from my account. People will hand you the rope to hang themselves with when they don't think they're in trouble. I spent the next several days doing something that felt strange after years of physical training and field exercises, sitting quietly at a motel desk with a laptop, a legal pad, and a highlighter, cross-referencing dates like I was building an intelligence report. Every withdrawal got its own line. The date, the amount, the stated reason if there was one, and whatever corroborating evidence I could find to match it. $600 in month 2, labeled vaguely as family expense on the account activity, matched almost exactly to a Facebook post from Denise about finally booking the caterer tasting. $2,000 in month 3 matched a dress boutique that, according to their own website, specialized exclusively in bridal gowns. Piece by piece, the picture became undeniable, and honestly, the process of building it gave me something to focus on besides the hurt, which I think is part of why I threw myself into it so completely. With everything documented, I met with the JAG attorney again, and she helped me understand my options. I could pursue this as a civil matter, sending a formal demand letter for repayment. I could also, given the clear documentation of unauthorized use beyond the scope of the power of attorney, file a police report for financial exploitation, since in my state, misuse of a power of attorney to convert funds for personal benefit beyond its authorized scope can rise to the level of theft or fraud, particularly against a protected class, which in some jurisdictions includes military members on active duty. Due to specific financial protection statutes, I chose to start with something quieter, something that would give my father one real chance to make this right before I escalated further. I wasn't doing this for spite. I was doing this because a part of me still hoped, somewhere deep down, that once he saw everything laid out clearly, in black and white, undeniable, he would finally understand what he'd done and choose me. I drafted a formal letter, with the attorney's guidance, addressed to both my father and Denise, outlining the exact terms of the power of attorney, the exact transactions that violated those terms, and a request for full repayment within 30 days, along with immediate revocation of the power of attorney, which I filed formally with the notary office that same week, cutting off any further access permanently. I also, quietly, opened a new checking and savings account at a completely different bank, one neither of them knew about, and set up direct deposit for my army pay to route there instead. Every dollar I earned from that point forward would be somewhere they could never reach. Then I drove to my dad's house one more time, letter in hand, and asked to speak with him alone. Denise, predictably, tried to insert herself into the conversation the moment she heard why I was there. I told her, calmly but firmly, that this conversation was between me and my father and that anything further would go through my attorney instead of a kitchen table discussion. The word attorney changed the entire temperature of the room. I sat across from my dad and slid the letter across the table. I watched his face as he read through it, the transaction dates, the total amount, the specific language of the power of attorney he himself had asked me to sign. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face that looked like real shame. But then Denise, who had been hovering in the doorway, despite what I'd said, walked in and said, "This is ridiculous, Richard. She's trying to punish us for planning a beautiful wedding for your daughter." Your daughter. As if I wasn't standing right there. As if I hadn't been his daughter for 28 years before Brittany ever entered the picture. My dad looked at Denise, then back at me, and he said the words that finally, completely severed something in me. "Emily, can't you just let this go? You make good money in the army. Brittany doesn't have that. Family helps family." I stood up from that table and I told him, as calmly as I have ever said anything in my life, "Family doesn't steal from family and then call it help. You have 30 days. Then I walked out. The 30 days passed with silence. No payment, no further discussion. Just a single text from my dad 3 weeks in that said, "Denise says we don't have that kind of money right now. Can we work out a payment plan later, after the newlyweds get settled?" That text told me everything I needed to know. This was never going to be resolved with patience or family loyalty. It was going to require actual consequences. Filed the police report the day after the deadline passed, financial exploitation, supported by every piece of documentation I had gathered. Because I am active duty military and the misuse involved funds specifically protected under service member financial protection provisions in my state, the detective who took my case actually flagged it for expedited review, and within 2 weeks, a formal investigation had opened against Denise as the primary user of the power of attorney. At the same time, I filed a civil claim through small claims court since the amount, while significant to me, fell within the jurisdictional limit, which meant I didn't even need a lawyer to represent me in the actual hearing, just my documentation and my own testimony. I also did one more thing, something that I debated for a long time before doing, but ultimately decided was the right call. I sent a private, calm, factual message to Brittany, explaining exactly where the money for her wedding venue had come from, with copies of the bank statements and the power of attorney document attached. I wasn't trying to ruin her marriage or her memories of that day. I told her explicitly that I understood she likely had no idea the money wasn't legitimately her mother's to give, and that I simply believed she deserved to know the truth about how her wedding had actually been paid for. Brittany's response surprised me. She called me crying, genuinely distraught, saying she had no idea that Denise had told her the money was from a family wedding fund my dad had supposedly been saving for years. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I actually believed one of them completely. Brittany had been lied to just as much as I had, just in a different direction. The court date arrived about 10 weeks later. I requested leave specifically to attend, and my command approved it without hesitation once I explained the situation. Since financial readiness and protecting service, members from exploitation is something the Army actually takes seriously. I walked into that courtroom with a folder containing every bank statement. The notarized power of attorney with its explicit emergency-only clause, the timeline of transactions matched against the wedding vendor payments, and a printed copy of Brittany's own message confirming the venue deposit came from Mom. Denise showed up with an attorney of her own, trying to argue that the power of attorney's language was open to interpretation, and that spending on a stepdaughter's wedding could reasonably be considered supporting family in an emergency sense. Given that Brittany had apparently been emotionally distressed about deposit deadlines, the judge did not find that argument persuasive at all. She read the exact language of the document aloud in the courtroom, emergency medical or safety related, expenses only, and asked Denise directly whether a wedding venue deposit met that definition. Denise didn't have a good answer. The judge ruled in my favor for the full amount plus court costs, ordering repayment within 60 days. But the moment that actually felt like justice, the moment I will remember for the rest of my life, was when the judge looked directly at Denise and said that using a power of attorney granted by a deployed service member for personal wedding expenses, against the document's explicit and unambiguous terms, was, in her words, a serious breach of trust that this court takes very seriously, and noted for the record that the ongoing criminal investigation would proceed separately from this civil judgment. I watched Denise's face go pale. I watched my dad, sitting beside her in the gallery, stare down at his hands, unable to look at me. The criminal investigation concluded about 4 months later. Denise ultimately accepted a plea deal for a lesser theft charge, given it was a first offense and full. Restitution had already been court-ordered, resulting in probation, mandatory financial counseling classes, and a permanent record that would follow her for the rest of her life. It wasn't prison. I never wanted prison. I just wanted the truth on record, officially, undeniably, so that no one could ever again say I was being dramatic about it. Here's where the story gets complicated because real life rarely wraps up as cleanly as we want it to. My relationship with my father did not magically heal after the court ruling. He paid the money back, technically, though it came out of what should have been his and Denise's joint retirement savings, since Denise herself had very little independently. But paying a debt and repairing trust are two completely different things. For almost a year after the court case, my dad and I barely spoke. He sent occasional texts on holidays. I responded politely, but kept my distance. I had spent so many years being the daughter who kept the peace, who smoothed things over, who absorbed the unfairness quietly so everyone else could stay comfortable, and I simply didn't have it in me anymore. About 14 months after that courtroom hearing, my dad reached out and asked if we could meet, just the two of us, no Denise. I almost said no, but I agreed, mostly because Priya, who had become something like a sister to me through everything, told me I deserved to hear whatever he had to say, even if I decided afterward that it changed nothing. We met at a small diner, the same one we used to go to on Sunday mornings when I was a teenager, back before Denise. Back when it was just the two of us figuring life out together. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that wasn't just about age. He told me that after the court case, he and Denise had gone through months of the financial counseling the plea deal required, and that in those sessions, for the first time, he'd actually had to sit and listen to a counselor explain, in plain clinical terms, exactly what financial exploitation of a family member looks like, and how common it is for people to justify it as just family helping family, right up until a court tells them otherwise. He said, and I could tell it cost him something real to say it. I chose comfort over you, Emily. For years, honestly, not just with the money. I let Denise's opinion of you matter more than my own eyes seeing how she treated you. And I told myself it was fine because you were strong enough to handle it. I used your strength as an excuse to stop protecting you. I'm sorry. I won't pretend that one conversation erased years of hurt. It didn't. But it was the first completely honest thing my father had said to me since I was 17 years old, and it mattered. We've been slowly rebuilding since then, carefully, on my terms, at my pace. He and Denise eventually divorced about a year and a half after the court case, not directly because of me, but because, as he put it, the counseling forced him to see patterns in their marriage he'd been avoiding for a long time, patterns that went beyond just what happened to me. Brittany, for what it's worth, cut contact with her mother almost entirely once the full truth came out, and she and I have actually built a real relationship since then, something neither of us expected, bonded strangely by having both been manipulated by the same person in different ways. As for me, I used the returned money, plus what I'd saved, Separately in that new account no one else had access to as the down payment on a small house near my current duty station. It's nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a decent yard, a kitchen. I've slowly made my own, but it's mine, completely, entirely. Mine. In a way, nothing in my father's house ever truly was after Denise walked into it. I still serve. I still lead soldiers. And now, when new privates come through my platoon, especially the young ones about to deploy for the first time, I tell them what my platoon sergeant told me years ago, except now I add my own chapter to it. I tell them, protect your finances like you'd protect your life. Because sometimes the people who hurt you the most aren't enemies on some distant battlefield. Sometimes they're sitting at your own kitchen table, smiling, telling you it's just money. Don't be dramatic. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Love does not require you to let people exploit you. Family does not get a blank check to hurt you just because you share blood or a last name or a childhood home. And standing up for yourself, calmly, legally, with documentation and patience instead of rage, is not being dramatic. It's being exactly as strong as the uniform you wear, or the life you're trying to protect, deserves. I built my case the way I was trained to build one, brick by brick, fact by fact. And in the end, the truth carried more weight than any of Denise's excuses ever could. That's my story. If it made you feel something, if it made you angry on my behalf or hopeful about your own situation, hit subscribe. Because there are more stories like this, one coming. Stories about ordinary people who got pushed too far and found the strength to fight back the smart way. Thank you for listening to my story.